November 1887. Montana Territory. Bitterroot Valley. Nobody noticed what was happening in that dugout on the eastern slope of the ridge. From the outside, it looked abandoned. A dark opening in the hillside, a thin wisp of smoke barely visible against a gray winter sky. Travelers passing on the frozen trail below dismissed it. Just another failed claim. Another man who gave up and moved on. But inside, it was another reality entirely. While every timber cabin in the valley burned through cords of firewood, while families huddled against walls that leaked precious heat into merciless cold, that dugout held a secret. A principle so simple that experienced builders had walked right past it for decades. A design so contrary to everything proper construction demanded that even mentioning it invited mockery. What did one quiet homesteader understand about heat, earth, and survival that an entire community of seasoned frontiersmen had missed? This is the story of how Isaac Brenner built a shelter that defied common sense and outlasted every conventional cabin when the coldest winter in recorded history arrived. No fame, no recognition, just 32 days of sustained warmth while his neighbors' homes became ice boxes with fireplaces. If you want to learn one frontier technique each week that actually worked when lives depended on it, real engineering, not theory, hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Let's build a community of people who understand that old doesn't mean obsolete. Now, let me show you what Isaac knew that everyone else ignored. Isaac Brenner wasn't trying to prove anything. He was a 34-year-old carpenter from Pennsylvania, unremarkable in every way that mattered on the frontier. Medium build, steady hands. A wife named Catherine and two daughters, Emily and Ruth, ages 6 and 4. They'd arrived in the Bitterroot Valley in the spring of 1885 with the same hope as everyone else: homestead land, timber, clean water, and a chance to build something permanent. Their first winter taught them what permanent really meant out there. The cabin Isaac built that first year followed every rule he'd learned back east. 16 by 20 feet. Log walls chinked with moss and clay. Stone fireplace on the north wall. Shake roof. Raised plank floor to keep moisture out. It looked like every other cabin in the valley. It performed like every other cabin, too, which meant it was cold, not uncomfortable cold, dangerous cold. The fireplace demanded constant feeding. For hours after the fire died down, the interior temperature would drop 30 degrees. By morning, ice formed on the water bucket near the wall. Catherine kept the girls bundled and wool even indoors. Emily developed a cough that wouldn't quit. That wet, rattling cough that killed children in their sleep. Isaac burned through his entire woodpile by February. He spent March cutting frozen timber, hauling it back on a sled, watching it smoke and hiss in the firebox because the wood was too green, too wet, too cold to burn clean. April finally came. Emily's cough faded. The family survived. But Isaac had spent 4 months doing the math in his head, and the numbers didn't lie. He was burning 6 cords of wood per winter just to keep his family barely comfortable. That was 2 months of labor just for fuel. It was unsustainable. It was exhausting. And worst of all, it was unnecessary. Because Isaac had noticed something during those long, cold nights feeding the fire. The stone fireplace, for 1,000 pounds of local sandstone, held heat. Hours after the fire died, you could still press your hand against those stones and feel warmth radiating back. Not scorching, just steady, persistent heat bleeding into the room long after the flames were gone. Thermal mass. He didn't call it that, but he understood it. And if stone held heat, what about earth? By June 1887, Isaac had made a decision that would make him the strangest man in the valley. He was going to build his next shelter into the ground. Isaac chose a spot 300 yards upslope from his cabin. A south-facing hillside with good drainage, rocky soil, and a clear view of the valley below. He started digging in July. Not a root cellar. Not a temporary dugout. A permanent home carved into the living earth. The design was specific, deliberate, and completely contrary to every principle of proper frontier construction. He excavated 12 feet into the hillside, creating a space 16 feet wide and 20 feet deep. The back wall and both sides were raw earth, cut clean and vertical. The front wall, the only wall exposed to weather, would be timber and stone, with a single door and one small window facing south to capture winter sun. The roof was a critical piece. Isaac built a timber frame, then covered it with split shakes, then a layer of canvas soaked in pine tar for waterproofing, then 12 inches of sod, live grass, roots still intact, soil packed tight. The weight was enormous. The insulation value was higher than anything a timber roof could provide. Inside, he dug the floor down another 18 inches and laid a foundation of flat stones. Nothing fancy, just local river rock set in sand. Thermal mass beneath their feet. The walls he left as bare earth, but he carved narrow ventilation channels near the ceiling, angling them up and out to the sod roof to prevent moisture buildup and allow smoke to escape. The fireplace sat in the center of the front wall, built from the same sandstone he'd used in the cabin. Smaller firebox, taller chimney. Every stone chosen for its ability to absorb and radiate heat. The logic was simple. Earth is a natural insulator. Soil temperature 6 feet underground stays constant year-round, roughly 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, even when the surface is frozen solid. Surround your living space with that stable temperature, and you're not fighting the weather anymore. You're borrowing the Earth's stored heat. Add thermal mass, stone floor, stone fireplace, and you create a heat battery. The fire heats the stone. The stone holds the heat for hours, radiating it back slowly, evenly, long after the flames die. Reduce your exposure to wind. Eliminate drafts. Seal your shelter against convective heat loss. It wasn't complex. It was just different. Different enough that people noticed, and different enough that they laughed. The first person to comment was Samuel Hodge, a timber merchant who supplied half the valley with milled lumber. He rode past in early August, saw Isaac hauling stones up the slope, and reined his horse to a stop. "That's not a home, Brenner. That's a hole." Isaac didn't look up. "It's a shelter." "A shelter for what?" "Badgers." Samuel shook his head and rode on, chuckling to himself. By evening, the story had made it to the trading post. By the next morning, half the valley knew that Isaac Brenner was building himself a burrow. The comments came in steady, casual waves. Not angry, not concerned, just amused. "Heard you're moving into a cave, Isaac. You gonna grow mushrooms in there, too? Catherine knows she's living underground now. She'd sign off on that." One of the experienced homesteaders, a man named Vernon Cale, who'd been in the valley since 1878, stopped by in September to watch Isaac lay the stone floor. Vernon was respected, methodical, a man whose opinion carried weight. He stood at the entrance for a full minute, arms crossed, studying the space. Finally, he spoke. "You're wasting good timber on that roof." Isaac paused, looked up. "How so?" "Because you're going to tear it down in a year when you realize you can't live in a dirt hole. No light, no air, damp as a spring cellar. Your wife's going to hate it, and your girls are going to get sick." Isaac set down his hammer. "Appreciate the concern, Vernon." Vernon shrugged. "Your time, your lumber." He walked away, didn't look back. Nobody stopped Isaac from building. Nobody tried to talk him out of it. They just stopped taking him seriously. When he showed up at the trading post for supplies, the conversations grew quieter. Polite nods, brief exchanges. The social distance of a man who'd made a strange choice and would have to live with the consequences. By October, the dugout was finished. Isaac moved his family in before the first snow. Catherine didn't complain. The girls treated it like an adventure, a house built into the hill, like something from a storybook. Emily ran her hands along the earth walls and giggled at the coolness against her palms. Isaac lit the first fire in the central hearth on October 18th, 1887. And then winter arrived. Not the winter they expected. The winter that would rewrite every assumption the Bitterroot Valley had about cold. November 14th, 1887. Temperature at dawn, 18 degrees Fahrenheit. By noon, 9 degrees Fahrenheit and falling. By sunset, -4 degrees Fahrenheit with wind gusts reaching 40 miles per hour. It wasn't a blizzard. It was an atmospheric assault, a pressure system that had stalled over the northern Rockies and refused to move. The cold wasn't sharp. It was crushing. The kind of cold that made your lungs ache when you breathed. The kind that froze sap inside standing timber and split trunks with sounds like rifle cracks echoing through the forest. By November 16th, the temperature had dropped to minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. By the 19th, minus 31 degrees Fahrenheit. And it stayed there. The valley had seen cold winters before, but nothing sustained like this. Days bled into weeks with no break. No thaw, no relief. The sky stayed clear, crystalline, merciless blue, and the cold deepened with every passing night. In the timber cabins scattered across the valley, families burned through their wood piles at terrifying speed. Fires that normally lasted 4 hours now barely held heat for 2. Chimneys that used a draft clean now backfilled with smoke because the temperature differential wasn't strong enough to pull air efficiently. Families woke to frost on the interior walls. Water buckets froze solid within arm's reach of the hearth. Samuel Hodge's family went through 8 cords of wood in 3 weeks. What he'd planned to sell, now consumed just to keep his children from frostbite. Vernon Cale's chimney stone cracked from thermal shock, spilling smoke into his cabin until he could seal it with mud and canvas. One family 2 miles south abandoned their homestead entirely, packing what they could carry and moving into town with a hotel had a massive central stove. People stopped visiting each other. The effort of travel, the exposure to wind, the cost and body heat, it wasn't worth it. The valley contracted into isolated points of light, each family burning through fuel, enduring, praying for a break. And then someone noticed. On December 3rd, 20 days into the freeze, Samuel Hodge rode past Isaac Brenner's hillside on his way to check a trap line. He'd avoided that section of the valley since the cold hit, embarrassed by his earlier mockery, assuming the family had either moved back to their old cabin or worse. But as he passed the slope, he saw smoke. Not thick smoke, just a thin, steady thread rising from the dugout's chimney. He stopped, stared. One thread of smoke. That was all. Samuel's own cabin had 3 fires going, hearth, cook stove, and a makeshift brazier in the corner, and his family was still cold. He turned his horse uphill. When he reached the dugout entrance, he could feel it before he saw it. Warmth radiating from the open doorway. Not blazing heat. Just warmth. Steady. Present. Impossible. Isaac stepped outside. Shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. Shirt sleeves. Samuel stared. How? Isaac glanced at the chimney, then back at Samuel. Earth holds heat. Stone holds heat. Fire's been out for 6 hours. That's not possible. Come inside. See for yourself. Stay with me, because what Samuel saw next humiliated every correct method in the valley. The numbers were about to prove what experience couldn't teach. Samuel Hodge stepped through the doorway into the dugout, and the difference hit him like a physical force. The interior temperature was 62 degrees Fahrenheit. Outside, minus 28 degrees Fahrenheit, with wind chill driving it lower. 90-degree difference. Sustained, with a fire that had been out for 6 hours. Samuel pulled off his gloves slowly, let his hands adjust to air that didn't bite. The space was dim, one small window, one lantern burning low. But it was livable, comfortable. Catherine sat near the table mending a shirt. Emily and Ruth played with wooden blocks on the stone floor, barefoot, their cheeks pink with health instead of cold. How much were you burning? Samuel's voice was quiet, almost reverent. Isaac gestured to a modest stack in the corner. Half a cord every 2 weeks. Sometimes less. Samuel did the math in his head. His own family was burning a cord every 4 days. Isaac's consumption was 1/8 of what a conventional cabin required. 1/8. That's not possible with a normal fire. It's not a normal fire. Smaller firebox, longer burn. I load it twice a day, morning and evening. The stone absorbs the heat. The earth holds it. Overnight, the temperature drops maybe 8 degrees. By dawn, we're still at 54, 55. I rekindle the coals, add fuel, and we're back to 60 within an hour. Samuel walked to the rear wall and pressed his palm against the bare earth. It was cool to the touch, but not cold, not frozen, not pulling heat from the room the way a timber wall did. The earth doesn't steal heat, Isaac said, watching him. It buffers it, keeps the temperature stable. In summer, It'll keep us cool. In winter, it keeps us from freezing. The stone floor, the stone hearth, they're batteries. They charge during the fire and discharge for hours after. Samuel turned, studying the ceiling, the ventilation channels, the careful angles of the chimney. Every detail intentional. Every choice made with purpose. Vernon said you'd tear this down in a year. Isaac smiled faintly. Vernon's welcome to visit. Doors open. Samuel left 20 minutes later, but the numbers stayed with him. 62 degrees. Half a cord every 2 weeks. A family living in comfort while the rest of the valley suffered. He told his wife that night. She told her sister. By December 10th, 3 families had ridden up to see the dugout for themselves. By December 15th, Vernon Cale made the trip. He stood in the doorway for a long time, silent, taking the warmth, the dry air, the children playing without heavy coats. Finally, he looked at Isaac. I was wrong. Isaac nodded. Appreciate you saying so. How deep did you dig? 12 feet into the hillside, 18 inches down for the floor. Vernon walked to the hearth, crouched, studied the firebox, smaller than standard. Don't need a big fire when you're not losing heat to the wind. This design isn't about brute force. It's about conservation. Vernon stood, brushed his hands on his pants. You mind if I bring some others by? People are hurting. Wood's running out. If this works, and it clearly does, they need to see it. Bring them. Over the next 10 days, 14 families visited Isaac's dugout. Some stayed 5 minutes. Some stayed an hour. All of them left with the same expression. Quiet disbelief mixed with something sharper. Regret. The realization that they'd dismiss a solution because it didn't look like what they expected a solution to look like. The temperature outside never rose above minus 18 degrees Fahrenheit for 32 consecutive days, from November 14th to December 16th, 1887. The longest sustained freeze in recorded Montana Territory history. Isaac Brenner's family stayed warm the entire time. His neighbors burned through their winter reserves in half that span and spent the second half rationing, shivering, enduring. The dugout hadn't just survived, it had thrived. And the difference was measurable, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. The thaw came slowly. By December 20th, the temperature had climbed to 12 degrees Fahrenheit. Almost balmy after 5 weeks of sub-zero cold. Smoke rose thick from every cabin as families restocked their wood piles, repaired frozen chimneys, and took stock of what the winter had cost them. Isaac's design stopped being a curiosity and became a topic of serious conversation. At the trading post, men gathered around the stove and talked through the details. How deep to dig, how to angle the roof for drainage, what kind of stone worked best for thermal mass, whether you could retrofit an existing cabin, or if you had to start from scratch. Samuel Hodge was the first to commit. In early January, he staked a south-facing slope a mile from his cabin and started excavating. He hired 2 men to help, faster work, shared knowledge. By March, his family had moved into a dugout 16 by 18 feet, built into the hillside with a sod roof and stone hearth nearly identical to Isaac's. Vernon Cale went a different direction. Instead of abandoning his cabin, he dug into the slope behind it and built an earth-sheltered addition, a heated room connected to the main structure, using the cabin as a windbreak and a hillside as insulation. Hybrid design. Practical. It worked. By spring of 1888, 3 more families had started construction. By fall, 2 more. The designs varied. Some deeper, some shallower, some with timber facades, some with stone, but the principle stayed consistent. Reduce exposure, maximize thermal mass, let the earth do the work. Nobody called them holes anymore. They called them dugouts, earth lodges, hillside shelters. Some families combined the term with the builder's name, a Brenner-style dugout, though Isaac never claimed credit or asked for recognition. The technique spread organically, passed from neighbor to neighbor, adapted to local conditions and personal needs. It wasn't a revolution. It was an evolution, a quiet shift in how people thought about shelter, insulation, and survival. By 1890, 11 families within a 15-mile radius had built some version of an earth-shelter home. The number would have been higher, But not every hillside was suitable. You needed southern exposure for passive solar gain, good drainage to prevent moisture buildup, and stable soil that wouldn't collapse during spring thaw. The people who built them saved wood, stayed warmer, spent less time maintaining fires and more time on the work that actually mattered, raising livestock, clearing land, building fences, growing food. The people who didn't build them still respected the method, because after the winter of 1887, nobody in the Bitterroot Valley dismissed a survival technique just because it looked strange. The stakes were too high for pride. And Isaac Brenner, quiet, methodical, unremarkable Isaac, had proven that sometimes the best engineering doesn't look impressive from the outside. It just works. There's a lesson buried in that Montana hillside that goes deeper than thermal mass or earth insulation. Isaac Brenner didn't invent the dugout. Indigenous peoples across the Great Plains had used earth lodges for centuries, structures partially or fully underground, designed to withstand extreme temperature swings with minimal fuel. Settlers in the Midwest built sod houses out of necessity when timber was scarce. The principle of using the earth as insulation wasn't new. It was ancient, but it had been forgotten, or more accurately, dismissed, because a dugout didn't look like progress. It didn't look like civilization. It looked primitive, backward, a step down from the log cabins that symbolized frontier success. And so people froze in their proper homes while a solution older than the nation itself sat dormant, waiting for someone humble enough to recognize that old doesn't mean obsolete. Isaac understood something the rest of the valley had missed. The earth isn't an enemy to be conquered. It's a resource to be used. 6 feet down, the temperature stays constant year-round. 12 inches of sod provides better insulation than 12 inches of timber. Stone holds heat longer than air. These aren't theories. They're physics. They work whether you believe in them or not. The winter of 1887 didn't prove Isaac right. It revealed what had always been true. Modern engineers are rediscovering these principles now. Earth-sheltered homes, passive solar design, thermal mass heating, geothermal stability. We've given them new names, refined the methods, added technology to optimize performance. But the core concept, letting the earth regulate temperature instead of fighting it with brute force, that's the same principle Isaac used in 1887, and it still works. The dugout on that Montana hillside stood for 43 years. Isaac's family lived in it until 1902, when they built a larger home downslope, though they kept the dugout as a root cellar and storm shelter. The earth walls never collapsed. The sod roof, relayered every few years, never leaked. The stone hearth never cracked. In 1930, the structure was abandoned. By 1950, the entrance had caved in, and the hillside had reclaimed what it had given. Today, if you know where to look, you can still find a depression in the slope, the remnant of stone foundation, the outline of where a family survived a winter that should have broken them. But they didn't just survive. They thrived, and they did it with half the resources everyone else burned through. That's not luck. That's engineering. The kind that doesn't need blueprints or building codes. The kind that listens to the land, observes what works, and doesn't let pride get in the way of survival. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what the coldest winter you've ever faced was like. Did you have to get creative to stay warm? What old technique or forgotten method do you think deserves a second look? And if you found value in this story, if you learned something that might actually matter when the power goes out or the supply chain breaks, hit that like button and subscribe. Every week, I bring you one real technique from history that worked when lives depended on it. No fluff, no theory, just proven methods that stood the test of the harshest conditions humans have ever faced. This is practical knowledge, and it's worth preserving. Historical note. This story is a dramatized reconstruction based on documented earth shelter construction methods used in the Montana Territory during the late 1800s. While specific individuals and events are fictionalized for narrative purposes, the technical principles, temperature differentials, and fuel consumption rates reflect verified historical practices. Earth shelter construction is a legitimate and effective building method, but modern applications should follow current building codes engineering standards, and professional consultation.